The gunshot that shattered the morning silence wasn't meant for Grace Kimball, but it changed her life forever anyway. She stood frozen behind the mercantile counter in Roswell, New Mexico, watching through the dusty window as her employer, Mr. Henderson, crumpled to the dirt street outside. The year was 1878, and death came quick in this corner of the territory. But Grace had never seen it happen right before her eyes. The outlaw who pulled the trigger was already galloping away, his laughter carrying on the hot September wind like something demonic. Within seconds, a crowd gathered around the fallen shopkeeper, but Grace knew from the way his body lay twisted and still that no doctor could help him now. By afternoon, she found herself standing in the office of Henderson's lawyer, a thin man with spectacles who kept clearing his throat nervously as he explained that the mercantile would go to Henderson's nephew in St. Louis. Grace had worked at that store for 3 years, ever since arriving in Roswell as a 20-year-old woman with nothing but a carpetbag and desperate hope. Now, at 23, she was right back where she started. "I'm sorry, Miss Kimball," the lawyer said, not meeting her eyes. "But there's no provision for employees in the will. You'll need to vacate the room above the shop by week's end." Grace walked out into the blazing heat of the New Mexico sun, her mind spinning. She had exactly $4.30 to her name. The small room above the mercantile had been part of her compensation, along with her meager wages. Now she would lose both the job and the shelter. She clutched her reticule tightly, feeling the panic rise in her chest like floodwater. Roswell wasn't a large town, sitting as it did along the Pecos River in the southeastern corner of the territory. It had been founded just a year earlier, and most of its buildings still smelled of fresh-cut pine. The population hovered around 200 souls, most of them ranchers, cowboys, or people serving the needs of ranchers and cowboys. Grace had tried to make a life here, tried to prove she could stand on her own 2 feet after fleeing from her aunt's house in Missouri, where she'd been told daily that she was worthless, that no man would ever want her because she couldn't cook a decent meal or sew a straight seam to save her life. Her aunt had been right about those particular skills. Grace's attempts at cooking usually ended in the charred disasters, and her needlework looked like it had been done by someone wearing mittens in the dark. But she could read and write and calculate figures faster than anyone she'd ever met. That had been enough to get her the job at the mercantile, keeping the books and managing inventory. Now those skills seemed worthless in a town that needed wives and cooks and seamstresses, not bookkeepers. She spent the evening walking the length of Roswell's main street, which wasn't saying much since the whole thing could be traversed in 10 minutes. She inquired at the hotel about work, but they had no need for anyone. The restaurant owner, a squat German woman named Mrs. Hoffman, asked if Grace could cook. "Not really," Grace admitted, and watched the woman's face close up tight as a morning glory at dusk. "Then I cannot help you," Mrs. Hoffman said, already turning away. Grace tried the saloon, though the thought made her stomach turn. The proprietor, a man with greasy hair and greasier eyes, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're a pretty thing," he said, grinning to show tobacco-stained teeth. "I could use a girl like you upstairs." Grace fled before he could finish explaining what that would entail. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Grace found herself sitting on the bank of the Pecos River, wondering if she had any choice but to return to Missouri and beg her aunt to take her back. The thought made her want to weep. She'd rather sleep under the stars than endure another day of her aunt's cruel tongue. But winter would come eventually, and the New Mexico nights could be bitter cold. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching until a shadow fell across her. "You look like you just lost your best friend." Grace looked up to find a cowboy standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking shade of green that seemed almost impossible in the fading light. He couldn't have been more than 25 or 26, and there was something gentle in his expression, despite the gun belt slung low on his hips and the dust that covered him from head to toe. "I lost my job," Grace said, too tired to be anything but honest. "And my home. Mr. Henderson was shot this morning." The cowboy's expression darkened. "I heard about that. Bad business. Henderson was a decent man." He shifted his weight, seeming to consider something. "Name's Vincent Easton. I work at the Circle M Ranch about 10 miles north of here. Grace Kimball." She didn't bother standing, didn't bother pretending she had anywhere to be. Vincent was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "The Circle M is looking for help at the main house. Mrs. Morrison, the ranch owner's wife, she's been poorly lately. They need someone to help with the household duties, cooking, cleaning, mending, that sort of thing." Grace felt her brief flicker of hope extinguish. "I can't cook, and I'm terrible at sewing. I can barely boil water without burning it." She expected him to nod politely and walk away like everyone else had. Instead, Vincent Easton sat down on the riverbank beside her, keeping a proper distance between them, but close enough that she could see the thoughtfulness in his face. "What can you do?" he asked, and there was no mockery in his voice, only genuine curiosity. "I can read and write. I can keep books and manage inventory. I can calculate figures in my head faster than most people can do it on paper. But none of that seems to matter much out here." She laughed bitterly. "My aunt told me I'd never make anything of myself because I couldn't master the skills a proper woman needs." I suppose she was right. Vincent was quiet for so long that Grace thought he might have decided she wasn't worth his time after all. But when she glanced at him, she found him watching the river, his expression distant. "My mother couldn't cook when she married my father," he said finally. "She was a school teacher from Boston, and she'd never had to do much for herself before. Her first attempts at frontier cooking were disasters. My father said she once made biscuits so hard he considered using them as ammunition." A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "But my father loved her more than anything in this world. He used to say that her laugh was worth 1,000 perfect meals, that her kindness made every burned dinner taste like a feast. They had 30 good years together before the fever took them both." Grace felt something catch in her throat. "That's a lovely story, but it doesn't solve my immediate problem. I need work, and I need a place to sleep." Vincent turned to look at her directly, and the intensity in his green eyes made her breath catch. "Come out to the Circle M tomorrow. Talk to Mrs. Morrison. Tell her I sent you. Tell her you're honest and hardworking and willing to learn. That counts for more than you might think." "But I told you, I cannot cook or sew," Grace protested. Vincent stood and offered her his hand to help her up. When she took it, his grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. Maybe those things don't matter as much as people think they do. Maybe there are more important things. Grace wanted to believe him, but years of her aunt's criticism had worn grooves in her soul. Like what? Like showing up, like doing your best, like being kind to people and honest in your dealings. He settled his hat back on his head. "I've got to get back to the ranch before full dark, but I meant what I said. Come out tomorrow morning. Follow the main road north, and you'll see the sign for Circle M about 10 miles out. Ask for Mrs. Morrison." "Why are you helping me?" Grace asked. "You don't know anything about me." Vincent was already turning to leave, but he paused and looked back at her. "Because you looked like you needed help, and I was raised to offer it when I could. No other reason necessary." He walked away into the gathering dusk, and Grace watched him go, feeling something shift in her chest. She didn't know if it was hope or simply the absence of despair, but it was enough to get her moving. She made her way back to her room above the Mercantile and spent the evening washing her only good dress and trying to make herself as presentable as possible for the morning. She barely slept that night, tossing and turning on the narrow bed, wondering if Vincent Easton's kindness would amount to anything, or if she was just delaying the inevitable. But when the first light of dawn crept through her window, she rose and dressed and used her precious remaining money to buy a simple breakfast at the hotel restaurant. Then she began the long walk north out of town. The September morning was already warm, promising another scorching day. Grace was grateful she'd worn her bonnet, even though it was old and the ribbons were frayed. The road north was well-traveled, rutted by wagon wheels and marked by horse hooves. The landscape around her was a mix of desert scrubland and grassland, with the Pecos River winding somewhere off to the east. In the distance, mountains rose like purple shadows against the bright blue sky. Grace had never walked 10 miles before, and by the time she spotted the wooden sign marking the Circle M Ranch, her feet were blistered and her dress was dusty despite her best efforts. But she kept walking, following the ranch road as it led through a gate and toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. The Circle M was bigger than she'd expected. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a covered porch that wrapped around at least 2 sides. There were several barns, a bunkhouse, corrals full of horses, and various other outbuildings she couldn't identify. Cowboys moved about their morning tasks, and the air smelled of horses and hay and dust. Grace felt suddenly very small and very out of place. She smoothed her dress with trembling hands and approached the main house, climbing the steps to the porch on legs that felt like jelly. Before she could knock, the door opened and a middle-aged woman appeared. She had graying brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that were currently clouded with pain. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, one hand pressed to her lower back. "Mrs. Morrison, my name is Grace Kimball. Vincent Easton suggested I come speak with you about work." Recognition flickered across Mrs. Morrison's face. "Vincent mentioned you might come by. Please, come in out of the heat." Grace followed her into the house, which was blessedly cooler thanks to the thick adobe walls. The interior was well furnished, but clearly in need of attention. Dust covered most surfaces. Dishes were piled in the kitchen, and Grace could see mending stacked in a basket by the window. "Mrs." Morrison gestured for Grace to sit at the large wooden table that dominated the kitchen. "Forgive the state of things. I've been dealing with terrible back pain for months now, and I can't keep up with the household duties the way I used to. My husband, John, he's been patient, but I know it bothers him to see our home like this. And the Cowboys, they need proper meals and clean clothes, but I'm just not able to manage it all anymore." Grace took a deep breath, knowing she had to be honest. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to tell you straight out that I'm not skilled in cooking or sewing. I can clean well enough and I'm a hard worker, but I've never mastered the domestic arts. If those are requirements, I should leave now and not waste your time. Mrs." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "What can you do?" "I can read and write. I'm good with numbers and figures. I kept the books at Henderson's Mercantile in town until he was killed yesterday. I'm organized and I follow instructions well. But my cooking attempts usually end in disaster, and my needlework is abysmal." To Grace's surprise, Mrs. Morrison smiled. "Can you learn? Are you willing to try, even if you fail at first?" "Yes," Grace said immediately. "I'm willing to work hard. I just need a chance." "Mrs.?" Morrison nodded slowly. "Vincent is a good judge of character. If he sent you out here, that means something. Here's what I'm thinking. You help me with the daily tasks, and I'll teach you what you need to know. My back keeps me from doing the physical work, but I can still instruct. We'll start simple, and you'll learn as you go. In exchange, you'll have room and board and a small wage. $20 a month to start. How does that sound?" $20 a month was more than Grace had made at the Mercantile. "That sounds more than generous, Mrs. Morrison. Call me Sarah, please. We'll be working closely together. No point in being formal." She stood carefully, wincing slightly. "Let me show you to your room. It's nothing fancy, just a small space off the kitchen, but it's private and clean." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a bureau, and a washstand. But it had a window that looked out over the ranch yard, and the bed had a beautiful quilt in shades of blue and green. To Grace, who had spent the night certain she'd be homeless, it looked like paradise. "When do I start?" Grace asked. "No time like the present," Sarah said. "Let's get you an apron, and I'll walk you through making the noon meal. We keep it simple for the midday, usually just beans and cornbread and maybe some salt pork. The Cowboys don't expect fancy, just filling." The next few hours were a whirlwind of instruction. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her back clearly paining her, while Grace followed her directions for soaking beans, mixing cornbread batter, and slicing salt pork. Grace's hands trembled as she worked, terrified of disappointing the woman who had shown her such kindness. The cornbread went into the oven, a massive iron contraption that intimidated Grace with its size and heat. "Now we just wait," Sarah said. "The beans need to simmer for a while longer, and the cornbread will take about 30 minutes. Why don't you tell me about yourself while we wait?" Grace found herself telling Sarah about her childhood in Missouri, about losing her parents to cholera when she was 16, about living with her aunt, who had made it clear that Grace was a burden. She told her about scraping together enough money to take the train west, about arriving in Roswell with hope and determination, about the 3 years she'd spent proving she could make it on her own. Sarah listened with the kind attention that Grace had rarely experienced in her life. When Grace finished, Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Grace. It takes courage to leave everything you know and start over. That kind of strength will serve you well out here." The cornbread came out of the oven golden and fragrant, not burned at all. Grace stared at it in amazement. "I've never made anything that looked like that before." "That's because you had good instruction," Sarah said with a smile, And because you followed directions carefully. You'll learn, Grace. I can already tell. At noon, cowboys began filing into the kitchen, hanging their hats on pegs by the door and taking seats at the long table. Grace tried not to stare, but she couldn't help looking for Vincent among them. He came in with the last group, and when his eyes found her, his face broke into a smile that made her heart do something strange in her chest. "Miss Kimball," he said, nodding to her. "Glad to see you made it out here." "Thanks to you," Grace replied, feeling suddenly shy. The cowboys ate with the focused intensity of men who worked hard physical labor all day. They didn't complain about the simple meal, just shoveled it in and asked for seconds. Grace noticed Vincent watching her from his seat, and every time their eyes met, he smiled in a way that made warmth spread through her chest. After the meal, the cowboys filed back out to their work, and Grace tackled the mountain of dishes while Sarah instructed her on the proper way to wash and dry them. By the time the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean, Grace's back ached and her hands were red from the hot water, but she felt a sense of accomplishment she'd never experienced before. Over the following days, Grace threw herself into learning everything Sarah could teach her. She woke before dawn to help start breakfast, which was usually biscuits and gravy with fried eggs and bacon. Her first attempt at biscuits resulted in hard, dense lumps that one cowboy joked could be used to build a new barn. But Sarah was patient, showing her again and again how to mix the dough just enough, but not too much, how to fold it gently, how to tell when the oven was the right temperature. The cowboys, for their part, were remarkably tolerant of her learning process. They ate her mistakes with good humor and praised her successes perhaps more enthusiastically than warranted. Grace suspected Vincent had something to do with that. She noticed how the other men respected him, how they listened when he spoke, how even the foreman, a gruff man named Tom, seemed to value Vincent's opinion. Grace and Vincent fell into a pattern of small interactions throughout the days. He always thanked her for meals with genuine appreciation. He offered to carry heavy buckets of water for her when he saw her struggling. Once, when she burned her hand on the stove, he was the one who rushed to get cold water and insisted on wrapping her hand carefully with a clean cloth. "You've got to be more careful," he said, his green eyes full of concern as he tended to her burn. "These hands are too precious to damage." "They're just hands," Grace protested, though his touch made her skin tingle in a way that had nothing to do with the burn. "They're your hands," Vincent said softly, and the way he looked at her made Grace feel like she was the only person in the world. 2 weeks into her employment at the Circle M, Grace was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when Vincent approached, leading his horse. It was late afternoon, and most of the cowboys were still out on the range. "Got a minute?" he asked. Grace pinned the last sheet to the line and wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course. I wanted to show you something. It's not far. We could walk, or you could ride with me if you're comfortable with that." Grace had never been on a horse in her life, but she found herself nodding. "I'd like that." Vincent swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand to her. Grace grasped it and let him pull her up behind him. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling off, and the closeness made her hyper-aware of every breath he took, every movement of his body. He smelled of leather and soap, and something uniquely him that made her want to press closer. They rode for about 15 minutes, following the river north. Vincent kept the horse at an easy walk, and Grace gradually relaxed into the rhythm of it. Finally, they crested a small rise, and Vincent pulled the horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. Below them, the Pecos River widened into a pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. The water reflected the blue sky like a mirror, and the trees provided blessed shade. It was the most beautiful thing Grace had seen since arriving in New Mexico. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," Vincent said. "It's peaceful." They dismounted, and Vincent tied his horse to a tree branch where it could graze on the grass growing near the water. Then he and Grace walked down to the pool's edge. Grace could feel the cooler air rising from the water, a relief from the constant heat. "Thank you for this," Grace said, "and thank you for sending me to the Circle M. Sarah has been so kind, and I'm actually learning. My biscuits this morning were almost edible." Vincent laughed. "They were better than almost edible. I had 3 of them." "You're just being kind. I'm being honest." He turned to face her, his expression growing serious. "Grace, can I ask you something?" Her heart began to beat faster. "Yes. Why do you always act surprised when someone is kind to you, like you don't expect it or don't think you deserve it?" The question hit too close to home, and Grace looked away, focusing on the water. My aunt spent years telling me I was worthless because I couldn't do the things women are supposed to do. She said no man would ever want me, that I'd end up alone and probably starve because I couldn't even feed myself properly. I suppose after hearing something enough times, you start to believe it. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and gently turned her face back toward him, his fingers warm against her chin. Your aunt was wrong. You don't know that, Grace whispered. Yes, I do. Grace, in the 2 weeks you've been at the ranch, I've watched you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I've seen you fail at things and get right back up and try again. I've heard you laugh with Sarah and be patient with the Cowboys and push yourself beyond what anyone asked of you. That takes strength and character and courage. Those things matter a hell of a lot more than whether you can make a perfect pie or sew a straight hem. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Why do you care? Vincent's thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Because from the moment I saw you sitting by that river, looking lost and alone, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Because every morning I wake up looking forward to seeing your face. Because when you smile, it feels like the sun came out even on a cloudy day. Vincent, Grace breathed, unable to say anything else. I know it's too soon, he continued. I know you probably think I'm crazy, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know that you're not worthless or unlovable or any of the other lies your aunt told you. You're extraordinary, Grace Kimball, and I'd be honored if you'd let me court you properly. Grace's mind spun. She'd never been courted before, never had a man look at her the way Vincent was looking at her now, like she was something precious and rare. I don't understand. How can you feel this way about me? You barely know me. I know enough. I know that you're honest, even when it would be easier to lie. I know that you're brave enough to keep trying even after you fail. I know that you're kind and smart and beautiful. What else do I need to know? That I really cannot cook or sew, Grace said, half laughing, half crying. That I'll probably never be good at those things. That I'm not the kind of woman men want to marry. Vincent's hands moved to cup her face, and the tenderness in his touch made her breath catch. Grace, listen to me. I don't care if you never learn to cook a perfect meal. I don't care if you can't sew a shirt to save your life. Those aren't the things that matter. What matters is that you can love. And something tells me that when you love with everything you have. That's enough. That's more than enough. Grace felt something break open inside her, some hard shell she'd built around her heart to protect it from more hurt. I've never had anyone say things like that to me before. Then the people in your life were fools. Vincent leaned closer, giving her every opportunity to pull away. May I kiss you, Grace? She nodded, unable to find words. Vincent's lips met hers softly, gently, with a reverence that made her feel cherished in a way she'd never experienced. The kiss was brief, chaste even, but it rocked Grace to her core. When Vincent pulled back, his green eyes were bright with emotion. Say you'll let me court you, he said. Say you'll give us a chance. Yes, Grace whispered. Yes, I'll give us a chance. Vincent's smile was radiant. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Grace let herself lean into him. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something real. They stayed by the pool until the sun began to sink lower in the sky, talking about everything and nothing. Vincent told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to yellow fever when he was 21, about drifting west looking for work and finding a home at the Circle M. Grace told him about her dreams of having a real home someday, a place where she belonged, people who wanted her around. You have that now, Vincent said. Sarah loves you already, I can tell. And the boys, they respect you. You've earned your place here, Grace. Because of you, Grace said. No, because of you. I just opened the door. You walked through it and made a place for yourself. As they rode back to the ranch, Grace's arms wrapped around Vincent's waist. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid hope that her life might turn out better than she dared to dream. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Grace's life. She continued to learn from Sarah, gradually becoming more competent in the kitchen and with household tasks. Her cooking would never be spectacular, but it became reliably edible and occasionally even good. The Cowboys stopped joking about her biscuits and started actually requesting them. Vincent courted her with old-fashioned propriety and genuine affection. He brought her wildflowers he picked on the range. He taught her to ride, patient and encouraging, as she struggled to find her seat on a gentle mare named Buttercup. On Sunday afternoons, their only half-day off, they would ride out to their spot by the river and talk for hours. Grace learned that Vincent was thoughtful and kind, quick to laugh and slow to anger. He treated her like she was something precious, but he never made her feel fragile or incapable. When she succeeded at something, he celebrated with her. When she failed, he encouraged her to try again. He listened when she talked about her fears and dreams, and he shared his own in return. "I want to have my own ranch someday," he told her one Sunday in late October as they sat by the river watching the cottonwood leaves turn gold. "Nothing huge, just a small spread where I can raise good horses and cattle, build a house with my own hands, make something that's mine." "That sounds wonderful," Grace said, imagining it. "Where would you want this ranch?" "Somewhere like this, near water, with good grass. Maybe further north where it's a bit cooler in summer." He glanced at her, his expression suddenly uncertain. "Would you want something like that? Or is that too isolated for you?" Grace considered the question seriously. A few months ago, she might have said she needed to be near town, near people and civilization, but the ranch had changed her perspective. "I think I'd like it. As long as there were people I loved nearby, I think I could be happy anywhere." Vincent took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Grace, I know it's only been a few months, but I need you to know that I'm serious about you. About us. I'm not courting you for fun or to pass the time. I'm courting you because I'm falling in love with you, and I want to build a life with you." Grace's heart hammered in her chest. "You're falling in love with me?" "I am. I know I probably should have waited longer to say it, but I'm not good at hiding how I feel. You don't have to say it back. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Grace turned to face him fully, her hand still clasped in his. "Vincent, I'm falling in love with you too. I think I started that first night by the river in Roswell. You were the first person in so long who treated me like I mattered, like I was worth something. And every day since then, you've shown me what it means to be truly cared for. So yes, I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure." Vincent pulled her close and kissed her, deeper this time, with passion that had been carefully restrained until now. Grace kissed him back, pouring all her feelings into it, all her hope and fear and love. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Marry me," Vincent said, the words tumbling out. "I know it's fast. I know we should probably wait longer, but Grace, I don't want to wait. I want to start building our life together now. Marry me, and we'll save every penny we can. In a year or two, we'll have enough to start our own place. We'll build something together, you and me." "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Vincent whooped with joy and spun her around, making her laugh and cling to him. When he set her back down, his eyes were bright with happiness. "We should tell Sarah and John, and we need to figure out when. There's a circuit preacher who comes through Roswell every few months. Or we could ride to Lincoln, that's the county seat, and find someone to marry us there." "Let's talk to Sarah," Grace said, her mind whirling with the reality of what she'd just agreed to. She was going to marry Vincent Easton. She was going to be his wife. The thought filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. They rode back to the ranch and found Sarah in the kitchen preparing dinner. John was there too, a tall, weathered man in his 50s who ran the Circle M with quiet competence. When Vincent announced their engagement, Sarah let out a delighted cry and pulled Grace into a careful hug, mindful of her still troublesome back. "Oh, I'm so happy for you both," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "Grace, you're like a daughter to me already, and Vincent, you're a good man. You'll take care of her." John shook Vincent's hand firmly. "Congratulations, son. You found yourself a fine woman." "I know it, sir," Vincent said seriously. "I'm the luckiest man alive." They discussed wedding plans over dinner. The circuit preacher wasn't due back in Roswell for another month, but Sarah suggested they could have the wedding right there at the ranch. "We'll make a day of it," Sarah said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Invite folks from town, have a proper celebration. Grace, we'll need to get you a dress. We can go into Roswell this week and see what's available, or order something from a catalog if you prefer." Grace felt overwhelmed by the kindness and generosity. "I don't need anything fancy. I don't want to be a burden." "Nonsense," Sarah said firmly. "Every bride deserves to feel special on her wedding day. We'll find you something lovely." The next month passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Sarah took Grace into Roswell, and they found a simple but beautiful dress in cream-colored cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Grace tried it on in the back room of the dry goods store and stared at herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. She looked happy. She looked loved. Vincent worked extra hours, saving every penny toward their future. He and Grace would steal moments together whenever they could, meeting in the barn after dinner to talk and share stolen kisses, or riding out to their spot by the river on Sunday afternoons. Vincent told her about the piece of land he'd been eyeing north of the ranch, near a tributary of the Pecos. It had good water and grazing, and the owner was willing to sell cheap because he was moving back east. "It's only 80 acres, but it's a start," Vincent said. "We'd need to build a house and barn, run some fence, but we could make it work. In a few years, we could expand." Grace loved watching him talk about their future, the way his eyes lit up with dreams and plans. She found herself imagining it too, imagining their own small ranch, their own home. Maybe children someday, if they were blessed. The thought of building a family with Vincent made her heart swell. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather for late November. The ranch house had been decorated with autumn leaves and late-blooming wildflowers. Cowboys from neighboring ranches came, along with townsfolk from Roswell, who Sarah and John knew. Grace was touched to see Mrs. Hoffman from the restaurant, who hugged her and whispered that she was glad Grace had found happiness. Grace stood in her room, smoothing the cream-colored dress one more time. Sarah came in to help with her hair, arranging it in a simple but elegant style, with a few small flowers tucked into the curls. "You look beautiful," Sarah said softly. "Grace, I want you to know how proud I am of you. You came here scared and uncertain, and you've blossomed into a confident, capable woman. Vincent is lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You taught me so much. I don't know how to thank you." "You just did," Sarah said, hugging her carefully. "Now, are you ready to marry that cowboy of yours?" Grace nodded, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. She walked out into the main room of the house, which had been arranged for the ceremony. The preacher stood at one end, and the guests packed the space, spilling out onto the porch. But Grace only had eyes for Vincent. He stood waiting for her in a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his dark hair neatly combed, his green eyes fixed on her with such love and awe that Grace felt tears prick her eyes. John offered his arm to walk her over to Vincent, and Grace took it gratefully, her legs suddenly unsteady. When she reached Vincent's side, he took her hands in his and squeezed gently. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered. The preacher began the ceremony, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. Grace tried to focus on the words, on the importance of the vows she was about to make, but mostly she was aware of Vincent's hands holding hers, his eyes never leaving her face. "Do you, Vincent James Easton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Vincent said clearly, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Grace Marie Kimball, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Grace looked into Vincent's eyes and saw her entire future there. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Vincent, you may kiss your bride." Vincent cupped her face gently and kissed her with a tenderness that made the assembled crowd sigh. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling so wide their faces hurt. The celebration that followed was joyous and lively. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing and laughter and more food than Grace had ever seen in one place. Cowboys who normally spoke only in grunts gave toasts that were surprisingly eloquent. Sarah cried happy tears and hugged them both multiple times. Even taciturn John smiled more than Grace had ever seen him smile before. As the sun began to set, Vincent and Grace slipped away from the celebration. They'd been given the foreman's cabin for the night, since Tom was away visiting family. It was a small space, just one room with a bed, table, and stove, but it felt like a palace to Grace. Vincent lit the lantern and turned to her, suddenly looking nervous. "Grace, I want you to know that we can take this as slow as you need to. "There's no rush." Grace walked to him and took his hands. "Vincent, I love you. I want to be your wife in every way." What followed was tender and sweet, and occasionally awkward, as first times often are. But Vincent was patient and gentle, and Grace felt loved and cherished. They lay together afterward, Grace's head on Vincent's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady under her ear. "I can't believe you're my wife," Vincent said, his fingers running through her hair. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "If it is, I don't want to wake up," Grace said. "Vincent, I never thought I could be this happy. I never thought someone like you existed. Someone like me? I'm just a cowboy, Grace. You're my cowboy. You're the man who saw me when I was lost and offered help. You're the man who told me I was enough just as I am. You're the man who loves me not despite my flaws, but with them. That makes you pretty extraordinary in my book." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "We're going to have a good life together, Grace. I promise you that. I'll work hard and save every penny. We'll get that land, build our house, raise our family. It might not be easy, but it'll be ours. As long as we're together, that's all I need," Grace said. They spent the night wrapped in each other's arms, talking and laughing and making love again as the moon rose high outside. Grace had never felt so complete, so whole, so absolutely certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next months proved Vincent right when he said it wouldn't always be easy. They moved into the bunkhouse, sharing a small curtained-off section that provided minimal privacy. It wasn't ideal, but it allowed them to save money faster. Grace continued working for Sarah, and Vincent took on extra jobs when he could, breaking horses for neighboring ranches and helping with cattle drives. The winter of 1878 into 1879 was mild by New Mexico standards, but there were still cold nights when Grace and Vincent huddled together under every blanket they owned, their breath fogging in the air. Grace learned to appreciate the small things, the warmth of Vincent's body next to hers, the way he always made sure she had the lion's share of the blankets, the morning coffee he'd bring her before heading out to his dawn chores. In February, Grace realized her monthly courses hadn't come. At first, she thought it was just the stress and hard work, but when another month passed, she had to acknowledge the truth. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with joy and terror. She and Vincent had talked about children, but they'd hoped to wait until they had their own place, until they were more settled. Now that plan was accelerated. She told Vincent one evening after dinner, pulling him aside to their private corner of the bunkhouse. "Vincent, I have something to tell you. I'm fairly certain I'm carrying our child." Vincent's eyes went wide, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, and he let out a whoop that made every cowboy in the bunkhouse turn to look. "I'm going to be a father. Grace, we're going to have a baby." He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down with a worried expression. "Is that okay? Did I hurt you? Should you be resting?" Grace laughed, love for this man overwhelming her. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Yes, you can still hug me." The news galvanized Vincent into even more determined action. He worked every hour he could, saved every penny, and by April, he had enough for a down payment on the land he'd been eyeing. They rode out to see it together, Grace on her gentle mare Buttercup, her stomach just beginning to show the smallest curve under her dress. The land was beautiful, rolling grassland with a creek running through it, cottonwood trees providing shade, and the mountains visible in the distance. Vincent showed her where he wanted to build the house, a spot on a slight rise that would catch the breeze and provide a view. "We won't be able to build much this year," Vincent said. "Just a small cabin to start, maybe 1 or 2 rooms. But we can expand as we go. And we'll need a barn first, really, for the horses and cattle." "It's perfect," Grace said, imagining their future taking shape. "Our baby will be born here, on our own land." Vincent pulled her close, his hand resting on her belly. "Our baby! I still can't quite believe it." They borrowed a wagon from John and Sarah, who were thrilled about the baby news and insisted on helping with the building project. Over the next months, every spare moment was spent on the new ranch. Vincent and several of the Circle M cowboys raised a simple barn first, then started on a small cabin. It was rough work, but Grace helped as much as she could, hauling water and supplies, preparing meals for the workers. Sarah worried about Grace overdoing it, but Grace was determined to contribute. This was their future, their home, and she wanted to be part of building it Besides, the physical work kept her mind off her nervousness about becoming a mother. What if she was as bad at motherhood as she'd been at cooking? What if she couldn't figure out how to care for a baby? Vincent, sensing her fears, would hold her at night and talk about his own parents, about the love and patience they'd shown him. "You're going to be a wonderful mother, Grace. I know it in my bones. You'll love our child with everything you have, and that's what matters most." By August, the cabin was finished. It was small and simple, just 2 rooms, but it had a sturdy roof, a good fireplace, and windows that let in light. Grace cried when she first walked into the completed structure, overwhelmed by the reality of it. They had a home, their own home. They moved in on a sweltering August day, their possessions fitting easily into the small space since they had so little. Sarah gave them dishes and linens, and John contributed a table and chairs he had built himself. The other cowboys from Circle M pitched in with various useful items, from cooking pots to tools. "We'll have you folks over for dinner once we're settled," Grace promised, knowing her cooking still wasn't spectacular, but determined to try. "We'll look forward to it," Sarah said, hugging her carefully around her now significantly rounded belly. "And you send word the minute you go into labor. I'll be right over to help." Grace was grateful for the promise. The thought of giving birth terrified her, but having Sarah there would help. Sarah had raised 3 children of her own, all now grown and living in other territories. She knew what she was doing. September passed in a blur of setting up their home, and Vincent working to get their small herd established. He'd bought 12 cattle and several horses with the last of their savings, hoping to breed them and slowly build up their stock. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Grace, now in her final months of pregnancy, found herself nesting with an intensity that surprised her. She cleaned and organized their small cabin repeatedly. She sewed baby clothes with Sarah's patient instruction, her stitches still crooked but serviceable. She cooked meals for Vincent, and while they weren't fancy, they were edible and made with love. One evening in late September, Grace and Vincent sat on their small porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Grace's hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby kick and roll inside her. "Do you remember that first night we met?" Grace asked. "When you found me by the river in Roswell?" "Of course I remember. I thought you were the saddest and prettiest thing I'd ever seen." Grace smiled. "I thought you were crazy for offering to help me. I thought you'd disappear and I'd never see you again." "Instead, you're stuck with me forever," Vincent said, taking her hand. "Best thing that ever happened to me," Grace said. "Vincent, I need you to know something. When I told you I couldn't cook or sew, when I warned you about all my failings, you said something I'll never forget. You said that I could love, and that was enough. That moment changed my life. For the first time, someone valued me for who I was, not for what I could do. You made me believe I was worthy of love." Vincent turned to face her fully, his green eyes intense in the fading light. "Grace, you are worthy of love. You always were, even before you met me. Your aunt was wrong, and anyone who made you feel less than amazing was a fool. I'm just grateful I got to be the one to show you the truth." "I love you so much," Grace whispered. "I love you too. You and this baby, you're my whole world." 2 weeks later, Grace went into labor in the middle of the night. Vincent rode hard to Circle M to fetch Sarah, then returned to pace nervously outside the cabin while Sarah and Mrs. Hoffman, who Sarah had brought along, attended to Grace. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the entire next day. Vincent could hear Grace's cries of pain, and it took all his willpower not to burst into the cabin. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Vincent's knees went weak with relief. Sarah appeared in the doorway, smiling despite her exhaustion. "You have a son, Vincent, a healthy, strong boy, and Grace did beautifully. She's tired, but she's fine. Come meet your son." Vincent walked into the cabin on shaking legs. Grace lay in their bed, looking pale and exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced baby wrapped in a soft blanket. Vincent approached slowly, hardly daring to breathe. "Vincent, meet your son," Grace said softly. "What should we name him?" Vincent reached out a tentative finger, and the baby grasped it with surprising strength. "Thomas," Vincent said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thomas Vincent Easton, after my father." "Thomas," Grace repeated, smiling. "It's perfect." Vincent sat carefully on the edge of the bed, putting his arm around Grace and looking down at their son. "He's so small." "He won't be for long," Sarah said from where she was tidying up. "Babies grow faster than you can imagine. Enjoy these early days." Thomas proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping in reasonable stretches and eating well. Grace, despite her fears, found that motherhood came more naturally than she'd expected. She loved her son with a fierceness that surprised her, and she found herself able to anticipate his needs with increasing accuracy. Vincent was a devoted father, taking every opportunity to hold his son and talk to him in a gentle voice. He'd come in from work covered in dust and sweat, wash carefully, then scoop Thomas up and walk him around the cabin, pointing out the window at the horses and cattle, telling him about the ranch they were building together. "You're going to grow up here," Vincent would say. "This is your home, your legacy. Someday, all of this will be yours, and you'll build on what your mother and I started." The first year of Thomas's life was challenging but rewarding. Money was tight, and there were setbacks. A hard winter frost killed some of their cattle. One of their best horses went lame, but they persevered, working together, supporting each other through the difficulties. Grace discovered she had a knack for keeping the ranch books, just as she'd kept the books at Henderson's Mercantile. She tracked their income and expenses meticulously, finding ways to stretch their resources and identify opportunities for profit. Vincent called her his secret weapon, the brains behind their operation. "I may be the one working the cattle, but you're the one making sure we can afford to keep working them," he'd say. They celebrated Thomas's first birthday with a small party, inviting Sarah and John and some of the cowboys from Circle M. Grace had baked a cake, and while it was a bit lopsided, it tasted good. She was so proud of that cake, and Vincent made sure everyone knew his wife had made it herself. 2 years ago, she couldn't boil water, Vincent announced to the gathered crowd. "Now look at this cake. My wife is amazing." Grace blushed, but couldn't suppress her smile. She had come so far from that lost, desperate woman sitting by the river in Roswell. She had a home, a husband who loved her, a beautiful son, and a future full of promise. As the years passed, their ranch grew slowly but steadily. They added more cattle, more horses. Vincent built an addition onto the cabin, giving them a proper bedroom separate from the main living space and a small room for Thomas. They planted a vegetable garden that Grace tended carefully, learning through trial and error what grew well in the New Mexico soil. When Thomas was 3, Grace realized she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, maybe because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1883, she gave birth to a daughter they named Mary, after Vincent's mother. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, bringing her toys and singing her the songs Grace taught him. Their family felt complete with 4, but life had other plans. 2 years after Mary's birth, Grace found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was the hardest yet, leaving her exhausted and sick for months. But when she delivered a healthy baby boy they named Samuel in early 1886, Grace felt her heart expand to accommodate even more love than she'd thought possible. Sarah joked that Grace was making up for lost time, creating the large, loving family she'd never had growing up. And in a way, that was true. Grace loved the chaos and noise of her growing family, loved the way Thomas looked after his younger siblings, the way Mary bossed everyone around despite being the middle child, the way baby Samuel smiled at anyone who looked at him. Vincent expanded their house again, adding 2 more rooms to accommodate their growing family. The ranch was doing well now, with a solid herd and a reputation for good horses. They'd paid off the land and were even able to hire a hand to help with the work. Grace still kept the books, now with greater complexity as their operation grew. One evening in 1887, Grace and Vincent sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had so many times before. Thomas, now 8, was showing Mary and Samuel how to skip stones in the creek. The sound of their laughter carried on the evening air. "Do you remember when I asked you what you could do?" Vincent asked, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "I remember. I told you I couldn't cook or sew. And I thought even then that those things didn't matter. But Grace, you need to know that you've become remarkably good at both of those things anyway." Grace laughed. "I suppose I have, though I still wouldn't call myself a master of either. You're a master of the things that really matter. You're an amazing mother to our children. You're the smartest business partner I could ask for. You're my best friend and the love of my life. You make our house a home. Those are the things that count. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play. Do you remember what you said to me that day I told you I couldn't cook or sew? I said you could love, and that was enough. You were right. Love is enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. Vincent kissed the top of her head. We've built a good life, haven't we? We've built a beautiful life, and we're not done yet. We still have so much more ahead of us. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Mary proved to have her mother's head for numbers and became invaluable in managing the ranch's business affairs. Samuel had his father's gentle way with horses and could calm even the most skittish animal. Grace and Vincent grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. The passion of their youth mellowed into something richer and more comfortable, but no less powerful. They knew each other's rhythms, could anticipate each other's thoughts, functioned as a seamless team in running the ranch and raising their family. In 1895, Thomas married a sweet young woman named Elizabeth from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was held at the Easton Ranch, with half the county in attendance. Grace watched her eldest son pledge his life to his bride and thought about her own wedding day 17 years earlier, how scared and hopeful she'd been. Thomas and Elizabeth had the benefit of growing up secure and loved, without the scars of difficult pasts. Grace was grateful for that. A year later, Elizabeth gave birth to a daughter, making Grace and Vincent grandparents. Holding her tiny granddaughter, Grace marveled at how life had a way of coming full circle. This little girl would grow up on the ranch that Grace and Vincent had built from nothing, surrounded by family who loved her, never doubting her worth or value. Mary, ever independent, announced at 19 that she wanted to go to teacher's college in Santa Fe. Vincent was hesitant at first, worried about his daughter being so far away, but Grace convinced him to let her go. She has dreams of her own, Vincent. We have to let her pursue them, just like people let us pursue ours. Mary excelled at college and returned 2 years later with a teaching certificate and a young man named James in tow. They were married in 1899, and Mary opened a small school in Roswell, teaching the children of the growing town. She and James built a house in town but visited the ranch frequently, and Mary's sharp mind remained invaluable in helping manage the ranch's books and business affairs. Samuel, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by falling in love with the daughter of the new doctor who moved to Roswell in 1900. Clara was quiet and studious, planning to follow in her father's footsteps and study medicine, which was still unusual for a woman. Samuel supported her ambitions wholeheartedly, and they were married in 1902 after Clara completed her medical training. They settled in Roswell where Clara opened her own practice, but Samuel continued to help manage the ranch, riding out several times a week. Through it all, Grace and Vincent remained the center of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. Their love story became legend in the area, the tale of the desperate young woman and the cowboy who saw her worth, who built a life and a legacy together through hard work and devotion. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1903, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Family and friends came from all over, filling the expanded house and spilling out into the yard. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Grace, now 48, stood with Vincent, now 50, and looked around at everything they'd created. Not just the ranch and the buildings, but the family, the love, the legacy. Thomas stood with Elizabeth and their 3 children. Mary was there with James and their 2 kids. Samuel and Clara had brought their infant son. The house rang with the laughter and chatter of 3 generations. Vincent pulled Grace into his arms as someone started playing a waltz on the fiddle. They danced in the evening light, moving together with the ease of long practice. 25 years, Vincent murmured. Best 25 years of my life. Mine too, Grace said. Vincent, thank you. For what? For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For loving me when I didn't think I was lovable. For building this life with me. For everything. Vincent smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart 25 years earlier by the Pecos River. Grace, you have it backwards. Thank you for taking a chance on a simple cowboy. Thank you for working beside me and building this dream with me. Thank you for giving me a family and a home and more love than any man deserves. I'm the one who should be grateful. Then let's just say we're both grateful, Grace said, laughing, and both incredibly lucky. Lucky and blessed, Vincent agreed. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends. The ranch that had started as a desperate dream in 1878 was now a thriving operation, testament to what two people could build together when they had love and determination and faith in each other. Grace thought about that young woman she'd been, sitting by the river in Roswell, convinced she had nothing to offer anyone. She thought about Vincent's words that had changed everything. You can love, and that's enough. He'd been right. Love had been enough. It had been the foundation for everything good in her life. Her love for Vincent had given her the courage to keep trying, keep learning, keep growing. Vincent's love for her had shown her that she had value beyond her domestic skills, that her intelligence and determination and heart mattered more than any recipe or needlework pattern. Together, they had built not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy, a life rich with meaning and connection. They'd raised children who knew they were loved unconditionally, who grew up secure and confident, who went into the world ready to build their own lives and families. They'd created something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. As the celebration wound down and their guests began to depart, Grace and Vincent stood on their porch, arms around each other, watching their family clean up and settle the children for the night. Thomas was staying in his old room with his family. Mary and James had claimed the guest room. Samuel and Clara would drive back to town in the morning. We should get some rest, Vincent said. We're not as young as we used to be. Speak for yourself, Grace teased. I feel exactly as young as I did at 23. Liar, Vincent said affectionately. Your knees creak when you get up in the morning, just like mine do. Details, Grace said airily. They went inside to their bedroom, the same room Vincent had added onto the original cabin all those years ago. Grace caught sight of herself in the mirror and paused. Her hair was streaked with silver now, and lines had formed around her eyes and mouth. But there was something in her face that the young Grace had never had. Contentment. Peace. The knowledge of being deeply loved. Vincent came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. You need spectacles, Grace said, but she was smiling. I see perfectly fine. I see a woman who's lived a full life, who's worked hard and loved fiercely and built something amazing. I see my wife, my partner, my best friend. I see the mother of my children and the woman I fall in love with more every single day. That's what I see. Grace turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring 25 years of love and gratitude into it. I love you, Vincent Easton. I love you too, Grace Easton. Forever. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges. In 1910, Vincent suffered a bad fall from a horse that left him with a badly broken leg. Grace nursed him through his recovery, just as he'd supported her through difficult times over the years. He recovered, but with a permanent limp and a decision that it was time to turn most of the ranch operations over to Thomas, who had been essentially running things for years anyway. Grace and Vincent settled into a quieter rhythm, still active but less physically demanding. They spent their days doing lighter chores, visiting with grandchildren, and enjoying each other's company. Grace finally learned to enjoy cooking, now that there wasn't the pressure of feeding a hungry ranch crew every day. She made elaborate meals just for the two of them, laughing when Vincent declared he preferred her simple early attempts. I married you for your determination, not your cooking, he'd say, though I'll admit you've gotten pretty good at both. In 1915, they celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by an even larger family. Thomas and Elizabeth had 5 children now, the oldest nearly grown. Mary and James had 4. Samuel and Clara had 3. The house was chaos and noise and love, exactly as it should be. Grace watched her grandchildren running around the ranch and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She'd created this. Well, she and Vincent together. They had built a family that would continue for generations, a legacy of love and hard work and treating people with kindness and respect. One evening in the summer of 1918, Grace and Vincent sat on their porch as they had countless times before. Grace was 63 now, Vincent 65. Age had slowed them down, but it hadn't diminished their love. If anything, they'd grown closer over the years, 2 trees whose roots had become so intertwined they were impossible to separate. Do you ever think about that first night? Grace asked. When you found me by the river? All the time, Vincent said. I think about how close I came to riding right past you. I almost didn't stop. I was tired, wanted to get home, but something made me pause. I'm glad you did. Me too. Best decision I ever made, stopping to talk to a sad woman by a river. Grace took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Their hands were both work-worn and weathered now, marked by decades of hard labor. But they fit together perfectly, just as they always had. Vincent, I need to tell you something. I don't say it enough, but you saved my life that night. Not just by getting me the job at Circle M, but by showing me that I had value. You gave me hope when I had none left. You gave me a reason to keep fighting, keep trying. Everything good in my life stems from that moment when you chose to see me, really see me, and offer help. Vincent squeezed her hand gently. Grace, you saved yourself. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and made a life. You're the one who learned and grew and pushed yourself beyond what you thought you could do. You're the one who loved me and our children and built this family. I may have helped at the beginning, but everything after that was all you. It was us, Grace corrected. Everything was us together. We built this life as partners. Partners, Vincent agreed. Best partnership I could have asked for. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had worked for 40 years. The ranch was successful now, known throughout the territory for quality cattle and horses. Thomas ran it with skill and care, continuing the legacy his parents had started. The house had been expanded multiple times over the years, growing to accommodate the family that kept expanding. Do you have any regrets? Grace asked. Vincent considered the question seriously. I regret that my parents never got to meet you or know our children. I regret that we lost that calf to the coyotes in 1889. I regret that I didn't dance with you more when we were young. He smiled. But overall, no. I'd do it all exactly the same. Every hardship was worth it because we faced it together. What about you? No regrets, Grace said firmly. Not one. My life didn't turn out anything like I expected, but it turned out better than I ever dreamed. I thought I'd end up alone and unloved. Instead, I got you and our children and this beautiful life. I got to build something meaningful. I got to love and be loved in return. How could I regret any of that? As the years advanced, both Grace and Vincent began to slow down more noticeably. Grace developed arthritis in her hands that made fine work difficult. Vincent's old injury from the horse fall pained him more in the winter months. But they adapted, finding new ways to be useful and productive. Grace helped Mary with the school, reading to the children and teaching them basic mathematics. Vincent worked with Samuel's boys, teaching them about horses and cattle, passing down the knowledge he'd accumulated over a lifetime. In the spring of 1922, Vincent fell ill with pneumonia. Grace nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside day and night, just as Sarah had taught her all those years ago. Clara, now an experienced doctor, came daily to check on him. The whole family rallied, taking turns sitting with Vincent, making sure he was never alone. Vincent recovered, but he never fully regained his strength. He became frailer, tired more easily. Grace worried constantly, but Vincent remained in good spirits. I've had a good run, Gracie, he'd say when she fussed over him. Can't ask for more than that. You're not done yet, Grace would reply firmly. We still have years ahead of us. And they did have more time, nearly 3 more years. They were slower years, quieter years, but they were still good. Grace and Vincent spent their days sitting together, talking about the past, watching their grandchildren grow, enjoying the peace that came with a life well lived. On a cold January morning in 1925, Vincent didn't wake up. Grace found him in their bed, looking peaceful, as though he'd simply slipped away in his sleep. She sat beside him for a long time, holding his still warm hand, crying tears of grief and gratitude. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the life Vincent had lived and the impact he'd made. Grace sat with her children and grandchildren around her, feeling their love and support, knowing Vincent would have been pleased to see how many lives he'd touched. In the months that followed, Grace grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She'd had 46 years with the love of her life. They'd built a family and a legacy together. Vincent's love had changed her life, had shown her she was worthy of happiness and belonging. She would carry that gift with her for the rest of her days. Grace continued to live on the ranch, now run entirely by Thomas and his grown sons. She helped where she could, but mostly she enjoyed being grandmother and great-grandmother to the ever-expanding family. She told stories about the early days, about meeting Vincent, about building the ranch from nothing. The younger generations listened with fascination, absorbing the history of their family. Grace lived to see her 70th birthday, surrounded by more family than she could have imagined in her darkest days in Missouri. She lived to see the ranch thrive and grow, to see her grandchildren marry and have children of their own. She lived to see the automobile become common, to see the world change in ways she'd never imagined. But through it all, she held on to the core truth that Vincent had taught her so long ago by the Pecos River. Love was enough. Love was everything. It was the foundation of family, the bedrock of home, the thing that made hardship bearable and joy complete. She'd been loved, truly and deeply loved, and she'd loved in return with everything she had. That was the legacy that mattered most. On a warm September evening in 1927, Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. Her children found her in the morning, a slight smile on her face, as though she'd seen something beautiful in her final moments. They liked to think Vincent had been waiting for her, ready to continue their partnership in whatever came next. Grace Easton was buried next to her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The gravestone was simple but meaningful. Grace Marie Easton, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she loved, and it was enough. At the funeral, Thomas spoke about his parents, about the love story that had started with a desperate woman by a river and a kind cowboy who saw her worth. He talked about how his parents had taught him that the most important things in life couldn't be measured in dollars or acres, but in the love shared and the lives touched. "My mother used to tell us that she couldn't cook or sew when she met my father," Thomas said to the gathered crowd. "She said she thought that made her worthless. But my father knew better. He knew that her ability to love, her strength of character, her determination and kindness, those were the things that mattered. They built this ranch together, but more than that, they built a family grounded in love and respect. That's their real legacy, not the land or the cattle or the buildings, but the love that continues through all of us who carry their name and their values." The Easton Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But the legend that was always told, the story that became part of the family mythology, was the tale of Grace and Vincent. The woman who thought she had nothing to offer, and the cowboy who saw her true worth. The couple who built a life and a love that became the foundation of everything that followed. In the end, Vincent had been right all those years ago by the Pecos River. Grace could love, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything that mattered, the beginning and end of all that made life worth living. She had loved and been loved in return, and that love had created something beautiful that would echo through the generations long after she was gone. The story of Grace and Vincent Easton became a reminder to their descendants and to anyone who heard it that love, real love, built on respect and partnership and genuine affection, could overcome any obstacle. That a person's worth wasn't measured in their domestic skills or their bank account, but in the strength of their character and the depth of their heart. That two people, committed to each other and working together, could build something lasting and beautiful, even starting from nothing. And on warm evenings, when family gathered on the ranch for celebrations or just to be together, someone would inevitably tell the story again. About the woman who said she couldn't cook or sew, and the cowboy who replied that she could love, and that was enough. About how that simple exchange changed two lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The end.